Kentucky lawmakers sent an austere one-year budget to the governor. Budgets for the judicial, legislative branches are in that stack to the governor, along with a revenue package, the transportation cabinet budget, and road plans on day 51 of the 2020 Kentucky General Assembly in regular session. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for Legislative Update. I'm Renee Shaw. What started out as being an education-first two-year state budget proposition by the governor has evolved into a reserved one-year continuation plan that holds the line on funding for most government agencies. The economic uncertainty caused by the novel coronavirus prompted Kentucky lawmakers to scale back ambitions for teacher and employee raises, and it keeps steady the base per pupil funding for primary and secondary education. Lawmakers adopted a pessimistic revenue forecast made by economists and cut back spending by more than $200 million. The compromise executive branch budget is also predicated on a bill dealing with retirement costs, Senate Bill 249, that was also awarded final passage today. That measure freezes the pension contribution rate for quasi-governmental entities like rape crisis and domestic violence centers, local health departments, and community mental health centers at 49% of payroll. And it also caps the employer contribution rates in the county employees' retirement system for another year. The plan sets out a number of bumpers for funding that won't be provided in case of an economic crisis. One significant increase, it provides money to help fund the COVID-19 response hotline that's become central to the state's response efforts. Senator Christian McDaniel, who chairs the budget panel, explains that the final budget modifications couldn't have been imagined or predicted at the start of this session.
And as much as we would like to provide a two-year budget, we will not. This budget will be a one-year budget. It will last until June the 30th of 2021. This was in consultation with the executive branch, with the House conferees, and I want to commend the executive branch and the director of the Office of the State Budget Director and the special advisor to the governor for coming over and sitting down with us and helping us as we worked our way through these processes and making recommendations on revenue and on expenditures and in places. And I think by and large the document we produced will be one of the most cross branches of government documents that we've ever put out. We used the most pessimistic numbers that we could get our hands on. Even with that, we do end with a budget reserve trust fund of about $303 million and an undesignated balance of over $40 million. And what that is, Mr. President, the Budget Reserve Trust Fund is the Commonwealth Savings Account. We say that we're going to end with $303 million. The undesignated reserve is monies that we haven't spent. But frankly, those are nothing more than a shock absorber for the budget. The experts pretty much agree that even under the most pessimistic scenario that it was provided to us, we will not be able to hit those estimates. So those, by and large, will absorb some of the impact of not hitting revenue estimates. Also in the budget, the Free Conference Committee report, we reduced the debt template rate down to 4.5%. And while I don't see us doing a particularly large amount of borrowing over the course of the next year and a half, the experts agreed that that should probably be in the 4.5% range. There are no raises and there are no stipends provided. There are no raises or stipend increases provided in this budget. While the existing stipends are there, the existing pay rates are there, there are no increases in this. In the teachers' retirement system, we have general fund support on top of the statutory contribution in the amount of $551 million in the fiscal year, and provided additional funding of $61 million for the single subsidy, and included language to ensure, and this is very important because a lot of times messages can go wrong in this Commonwealth, but I want to be clear that this bill has language to ensure that even though we are providing the extra $67 million for the single subsidy, there will not be an increase to teacher retiree health contributions. In Kentucky Wired, there is general fund support in both years of in the year of $34.4 million for Kentucky Wired, and we added language making sure that the rates charged to agencies could not be higher than they are right now. We also provided sale language to allow the Finance Cabinet to pursue the sale of Kentucky Wired.
McDaniel says the budget offers the governor, quote, unparalleled flexibility to address the coronavirus crisis. Senate Minority Leader Morgan McGarvey says the one-year spending plan is far from perfect, but that unprecedented times call for a rallying together. The Louisville Democrat quipped that the cupboard is bare when it comes to state coffers, and he urged lawmakers to give more consideration to revenue options they've bypassed, like sports betting. He was pleased that some measures he found objectionable had been removed and asserted a renewed fight for priority measures in 2021.
Things have changed. That's why the budget has changed. The part of the Senate budget that would have removed funding from the teachers' retirement system has been taken out. Medicaid, as you heard from the Senator from Kenton today, is getting funded. We are providing for many of our essential services in this budget. The cuts to the public health departments were taken out of the budget and have been restored in this Free Conference Committee report. At a time when we must pass a budget with no days remaining, I think that this is one we should look at passing. And I think that that is what coming together and seeing what we can accomplish to be part of Team Kentucky means. That also means we will be back in January. And some of the things that I wish were in this budget that aren't, we will fight for then when hopefully we have more money and a better idea of what's going on. So we can fight for education, so we can fight for teachers, so we can fight for health care for our most vulnerable, for our first responders, for the people right now who are first responders that we might not have thought of that way. Our truck drivers, our sanitation workers, our grocery store workers, those on the front lines. And we will have those fights. But we need a temporary spending plan in place now that can go to the governor's desk so the Commonwealth can continue to operate.
The governor has the option of issuing line item vetoes in the spending plan, power that Leader McGarvey said could be used to, quote, clean it up. Laying aside the usual partisan rhetoric that's amplified over the budget in most years, legislators on both sides of the aisle lamented that uncertain times called for greater cooperation. Republican Senator Stephen Meredith said under normal circumstances he would have voted against this plan. He says the austere budget may prompt future action by lawmakers to address the state's economic environment.
I think what's most lacking at this point in time is the vision for the future. What are we going to look like? Certainly there's nothing in this budget that suggests that, but we know that we're going to go through a very difficult period, a very austere period. But that's okay, because opportunity always arises out of adversity if we will look for it. I would hope that on both sides of this chamber, we would look for those opportunities because I think they're there. And I think the vision that we have for the future is the same we've had for the last 3 or 4 years. We have to grow Kentucky. We have to create jobs. We have to modernize our tax code. And if we do those things, that'll get us where we need to be.
Lawmakers had to detour from their ambitions to give raises to state workers and school personnel in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. Senate Majority Floor Leader Damon Thayer said lawmakers need not reject the good for the sake of the perfect.
And where we were headed just a couple of weeks ago, Mr. President, was an unprecedented level of funding for public education, an increase in funding for post-secondary education, raises across the board for state employees, the ability for local school boards through the SEEK formula to give raises to classified and certified employees. But then the bottom fell out, and we had to turn on a dime. And indeed, the executive branch collaborated with us. Members of the senator from Jefferson 19's party met with us and indeed encouraged us to do this one-year budget with no raises and budgeting to the worst possible economic forecast that we had in our hands.
The full economic toll of the COVID-19 pandemic is uncertain and has yet to be realized. There could be a budget correction if general fund appropriations are too out of whack with revenue collections. Grayson Democrat Robin Webb voted for the spending plan, which she believed could have been reconciled before now. And she chided legislators for the example they're setting for the state.
We continued on to get where we are today that we could have easily been a couple of weeks ago. So that's what tugs on my heartstrings. The fact that I've been here, our staff's been here, we've got staff that are infected with this. I'm sure it's everywhere at this point. But still, a portion of the Commonwealth's unrepresented here and has been because my colleagues are at risk. That's where my heartstrings, who's pulling my heartstrings, and the population that they represent that aren't here. Those of us who are here probably shouldn't be here. I'm proud to serve. When I signed up for this job, it was just like joining the Army or being a first responder or a truck driver. I'm here, proud to be here, representing my people. But we have asked to lead, and we have asked our people to make sacrifices and be indoor and stand back and do all the things that we have been unable to do, and we've been unable to lead by example. And for that, I apologize to the people of the Commonwealth. I'm voting yes on this budget. We could have done it several weeks ago, and we did not.
To Senate President Robert Stivers, it's the legislature's duty to be in Frankfort during difficult times. Discussing how much money there is for the budget, he made plain the economic trouble that lies ahead.
When we came here, we were told, and this is a little down in the weeds, $11.7 billion is what we would have to appropriate to. Then it was dropped without the consensus forecast, $11.6 billion. Folks, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be lucky to hit $11.4 billion. That's a $307 million decrease from what we were initially told. We did not know if there was going to be a federal stimulus, if there would be budget stabilization. We didn't know a lot of things. So I can tell you this. Some of the things that have been said here could have increased revenues. Well, you could have had expanded gaming. That was closed. All the racetracks, all the other things, they're closed. It would have given us no more money. Just because there's a disagreement doesn't mean you're anti-Kentucky. Just because you have a different opinion doesn't mean that you can't agree on something. If you really think about what we're doing, we're taking a shot in the dark. A total shot in the dark.
The Senate passed what's called the Free Conference Committee report to House Bill 352, 34-0. Because of the pandemic, lawmakers' social distancing practices were on full display as some senators, as you saw, wore face shields. In the House, members voted remotely, leaving an almost empty chamber that consisted of leadership and key staff during today's proceedings. House members transmitted their votes to their respective party leaders. House Minority Floor Leader Joni Jenkins took note of the moment. She applauds the decision to budget for just 1 year and says the plan prioritizes services Kentuckians need during such unprecedented times. But she did object to what she called unnecessary restrictions in the budget.
Why, for example, are we cutting the governor's budget by more than $500,000 during this time of crisis? At a moment when Governor Beshear is setting a national example of what an executive branch leader should be doing, it makes no sense to cut back his office when we are not asking our other constitutional officers to make the same type of sacrifice. I have the same concern when it comes to our teachers. When they are working harder than ever to make sure our students are still learning, we are asking them in a budget reduction plan to shoulder a larger burden by potentially making their retirement system a piggy bank. We have worked so hard to get all of our retirement systems back on their feet over the last 6 years, and now is not the time to backtrack on that goal. There has to be a better way, and teachers deserve to know why they are being asked to do more than others. This budget also calls on the state to somehow find another $20 million in restricted funds within the Medicaid budget without giving any guidance on where to find it. If this money cannot be found, the program could lose up to $90 million, money we cannot afford to pass up. There are other unnecessary restrictions in the budget. The Department for Military Affairs, for example, might have a tough time at Bluegrass Station if there is a sudden need for increased military gear needed by our armed forces. Kentucky State Police may not be able to access funding from the U.S. Department of Justice to buy things like body armor, weapons, and other equipment. Other restrictions could make it tougher to quickly repair or replace state facilities damaged by fire or natural disaster. The tourism and transportation cabinets could have issues as well because of these limitations. At a time when our executive branch needs flexibility, we're tying them down in these and other ways. This approach is questionable during normal times, but is even more problematic now during a time of emergency.
The House sent the one-year executive branch budget to the governor on a vote of 80-0. Along with the state spending plan, a revenue package is always in tow. House Bill 351 includes an excise tax on vapor products, expected to raise about $25 million over 2 years. And it was also used as a vehicle to give some flexibility to the State Board of Elections during the COVID-19 pandemic. Kentucky's primary has been delayed 5 weeks, as you know, to June 23rd. And Republican Secretary of State Michael Adams says current law allows for the time and place of an election to be altered, but law doesn't allow for the manner or method of an election to be changed. An amendment to the revenue bill seeks to ease that restriction. The Senate A&R committee heard Adams' request for approval of contingency plans because of the pandemic.
By joint agreement of the governor and the Secretary of State, this would allow us, by agreement, to alter the manner of an election. Then the State Board of Elections would come up with emergency regulation to provide for what that manner might be. So, for example, it would allow them to permit absentee voting under a condition not currently allowed by law. There are various reasons people can vote absentee, age, disability, and so forth. What we have right now is not one of those exceptions. So this would allow for that to occur. Obviously, we're sensitive to the notion of an unelected board having the power to functionally suspend statutes that you all have enacted. So we have a check in this bill, in this language, with those procedures from the Board of Elections to be subject to the approval both of the governor and the Secretary of State. So you would have front-end accountability by elected officials who happen to be of differing parties, and you would have back-end the same thing. So I think this is a useful way to respond to a situation that's still developing. My hope is to have a normal election on June 23rd, but that assumes that we're going to be able to find 16,000 poll workers. And on average, their age now is age 65. I'm concerned about having enough poll workers and being able to actually have a full in-person election. I'd like us to be able to prepare in advance for a situation where we have limited in-person voting and expanded voting by mail. But let me tell you what I would not sign off on in this capacity if you change this language. I will not accept vote by mail as done in West Coast states where they just mail everybody a ballot. That's unacceptable for lots of reasons, the biggest one being our voter rolls are not in federal compliance. Some 8 to 10% of our voter file is people that we know shouldn't be on our rolls. I'm in court now trying to get that cleaned up, but we're just not ready for prime time to have vote by mail in this state.
The revenue package was approved by the state Senate 20-8 with 5 pass votes. The House awarded it final passage 68-22. State lawmakers also have sent to the governor the judicial branch, the transportation cabinet, highway construction plans, and legislative branch budgets. There are no raises in the legislative branch budget, and the legislative pension contributions would be transferred to the Kentucky State Police retirement system. Now, circling back now to the COVID-19 pandemic that's claiming lives globally and here in Kentucky. Governor Andy Beshear announced during his daily coronavirus briefing that a total of 20 Kentuckians have died from the disease, and the confirmed cases continue to mount.
We have 93 new cases today. And let me say that while 93 is a lot of cases, this is less than yesterday's. It doesn't represent a doubling of the overall number in the time frame that we're seeing in other states. So again, while we don't want any new cases, we know that there are going to be cases. But our rate of increase is lower at the moment than anticipated. And that's a good thing overall for our health care capacity. But we can also at the moment confirm 2 new deaths, and those are from a 60-year-old male from Davis County and a 76-year-old female from Hopkins County. Beware of scams about testing and testing kits. Beware of any at-home testing. We don't believe in any of it at the moment. Most likely, it is a scam. Beware of pop-up drive-through testing sites. We have seen a couple that are trying to charge people a certain amount in cash. We cannot tell you the validity of any of them whatsoever unless they are ones that are connected to a healthcare facility themselves. There's certainly one of those in Hazard and one in Louisville and in a couple of other areas, but any pop-up, drive-up testing I would be very hesitant about. Kentucky National Guard is now being deployed to help at food banks to feed Kentuckians. Deployment is going to help feed seniors, families, and displaced workers. The National Guard members will assist Kentucky's food banks by sorting and packing food into bags and boxes and distributing that through no-touch food distributors. We'll have 70 National Guard members that will be deployed at 4 regional food bank warehouses. Those are in Louisville, E-Town, Wilder, and Lexington. Collectively, the food banks will provide distribution to those at risk for hunger.
On Monday's Kentucky Tonight the other night, we talked with Kentucky's Commissioner for Public Health, Dr. Stephen Stack, about the pace of the pandemic and how Kentucky's restrictions are helping to slow the spread here.
The numbers are going up, and the numbers are going to go up, so we know that. That's just a fact. The good news, though, is that the numbers are going up much more slowly than they might otherwise. So the measures we've taken, the measures that Kentuckians have worked with us to achieve, we believe are having the desired effect. Because at this stage, we could be seeing a doubling every day, and we are clearly not seeing a doubling
like other
every
states
day.
are.
Correct.
Yeah.
When we start seeing the doubling, we know that things are starting to get really hot.
But last Friday, we saw a doubling almost with 92 cases, and then it took a dip. So what do you read into that? So
because testing is not as widespread as we would like it still, it means that we're not going to sample the population consistently across the whole state. So it just matters the sample size. If you have a small sample size, it can vary a lot more from day to day.
Right. We know our Tennessee neighbors are struggling. When I last looked at a news account, they had 1,928 cases, 13 confirmed deaths. We know that today the governor has issued an executive order on travel with particular focus on traveling to Tennessee with some exceptions, whether that's work, caregiving, court order, those types of things that are necessity to travel to Tennessee. Why is Tennessee such a pivotal place right now?
Right, so if you look at the map, and the governor showed this at the press conference tonight, there's a cluster of counties right over the southern border that's on the 75 corridor that leads right into Nashville, and that is the biggest cluster of activity in the state of Tennessee. And so if you go over that border, and there's a lot of people, I like going to Nashville too, and the Grand Ole Opry and all, but if you go over the border into that area, you are going right through the most intense cluster of coronavirus in that 2-state area. And if you do that, you run the risk of bringing it back. And what we keep telling people is you cannot take this lightly. This is a big deal because while you may be young and think you're invincible, people who are over 60 and people who have medical problems and the occasional unlucky person who doesn't have any identifiable risk factors will get sick, will end up in a hospital, and unfortunately, as you're seeing, some will die. And so this is not a playing time. This is serious. And so going through that corridor is really high risk.
And so if you don't have any of those extenuating circumstances that would require you to travel to Tennessee and you're caught doing so, what's the repercussions?
Well, so we've talked about this. We really have to rely on society doing the right thing. I mean, this is a democracy. This is not something where we can compel everybody to do just things we tell them to all the time. So we really rely on the public at large to, one, just assume everyone has the coronavirus. Like your neighbor, love your neighbor, but do it from 6 to 10 feet away. Smile. Don't hug for right now. And for the people who are not following these guidelines, you're being awful cavalier, not only with your own life, but a lot of other people's lives, number one. And number two, if you know someone's not following the rules, you see people doing bass fishing competitions at the state park, you see people crowding into a retail store that is still open because they're considered essential, you ought to stay away because you should assume a lot of those people may be infected and what you bring home may be something that causes you a steep price to pay.
Yeah. So you're asking those folks who do make that travel that's not necessary to self-quarantine for 14 days.
Right. So if you go into one of these high-risk areas, and I would say going anywhere outside of your local community, and actually going anywhere outside of staying with your own family and in your own home pretty much, you should really take extra steps. But certainly if you're going to go against the governor's order across state borders, you ought to just stay home for 2 weeks and self-isolate and assume that you probably got exposed.
It does bring up the point, Dr. Stack, that there is really no uniform nationwide standard on restrictions, on protocols, on travel, etc. States, maybe some are taking a regional approach, but that's not a widespread happening. So what do you think about, should there be a national set of protocols that all states abide by?
Well, obviously, I think, one, it's a disease that's 3 months old, so there's a lot of uncertainty in some ways. So I can't entirely be critical of everyone else because we're not in lockstep 100%. But I do think there is an opportunity for us to be far more uniform. I mean, we have learned a lot in the last 3 months about what happened in the Far East and in Europe, and now, of course, what's unfolding in New York, which is hitting the news on a regular basis. So I think we had an opportunity to be more consistent and more uniform. It's an unfortunate opportunity we missed. I think in Kentucky, we jumped in early, and we took steps at the very beginning. We saw case number 1, and we started taking aggressive steps. So in Kentucky, you have a chance to be safe if we just follow these rules. Our risk is a lot lower, but if people disregard these closures and these restrictions, we're going to lose that edge and lose that benefit.
This Friday night at 8:30, right after Commandant Kentucky, please tune in for our special series on the coronavirus, a Kentucky update. For more with Dr. Stack and the Chief Medical Officer at the University of Louisville. We'll hope you'll tune in. That's all for day 51 of the 2020 Kentucky General Assembly in regular session. For information about legislative meetings, call 1-800-633-9650. You can also follow our gavel-to-gavel coverage throughout the day by downloading KET's legislative coverage app to your smartphone or tablet. You can watch on our Kentucky channel or follow along online at ket.org and see our archive coverage and more. And you can follow me on Twitter to get updates throughout the day. Lawmakers are in a 10-day recess to give the governor time to issue any more vetoes. They will return on Monday, April 13th for the last 3 days of the session. That's when Legislative Update will return at 11 p.m. Eastern, 10 Central Time on KET. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Renee Shaw. Stay and be well, and we'll see you in a few days.